Member-supported KVIE Channel 6.
From our nation's capital, this is Washington Week. And now here's moderator Gwen Eiffel.
Hold on to your hats and your predictions. This Tuesday's election night may be running a little late. Tonight, a special pre-election roundtable. We tackle the unanswered questions. Who is going to the polls? The final critical factor in every election is turnout. Whoever wins that battle wins the war. The war for the Senate, where a dozen races are still too close to call. The war for the nation's state houses, where women and Democrats could make history. The war for White House muscle, as President Bush dashes to 15 states in 5 days, stumping for Republicans. And the war over the economy. Voters worry that it's weak, but who will they blame? Covering these stories this week, David Broder of the Washington Post, Richard Burke of the New York Times, Gene Cummings of the Wall Street Journal, Jeffrey Birnbaum of Fortune magazine, and we return to Texas with award-winning filmmaker Paul Steckler.
Corporate funding for this program is provided by SBC Communications, committed to providing Americans more choices in high-speed internet access and working to widen opportunities in broadband technology. As providers, as people, we're SBC Communications.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This program was also made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. Here again is moderator Gwen Eiffel.
Good evening. Well, if you had any doubt about how important Tuesday's election will be, just watch for the frantic last-minute effort to turn out the vote. National party groups, special interests, and an army of volunteers on the ground will spend tens of millions of dollars goosing their likely voters to get to the polls. Filmmaker Paul Steckler takes a look at all this for us, and he looks through the prism of the great state of Texas.
Now the race is on, and here's Tony Sanchez in the backstretch. Kurt Watson coming up on the inside. Peyton Laney ain't holding back, ain't gonna fall.
With millions of campaign dollars already spent and just 4 days to go till the elections, the tightest races in Texas, as in the rest of the country, are now consumed by one thing.
Turnout.
Turnout. Turnout.
Turnout.
Turnout is absolutely key. Turnout is everything.
The assumption is that those who are economically better off will turn out in greater numbers. Here in Sun City, a retirement community, turnout is often the highest in Texas, over 90%.
The Sun City residents have the time to study issues and to vote. In fact, you will hear the expression, all we have to do here is play golf and vote.
This generation realizes the significance of voting.
Communities like Sun City tend to be Republican, so this is an advantage the GOP takes into every election. A visit to the heavily Hispanic Oak Cliff neighborhood in Dallas, where turnout is among the lowest in Texas, illustrates the task Democrats face in bringing out their vote.
¿Cómo está, señora? ¿Le puedo dar un folleto? ¿Está registrada para votar? ¿Es ciudadano? No, permiso. ¿Es ciudadano? ¿Está registrado para votar o conoce a alguien que...
We really have a very high population of people who've come recently. There's no English spoken in the home. There's great suspicion of American politics, and people are just battling to get paid.
They're not waiting for an election day. They're living their lives. So what we have to remind them is that voting and the electoral process and governance is very important to their lives.
This year, with a multimillionaire gubernatorial candidate, the Texas Democrats may actually have a financial advantage to get out the vote.
Can Governor Perry count on your vote?
Republicans are working hard to get their vote out, too.
Okay, well, we certainly hope that you'll support all of our Republican candidates.
We're having several walks in which hundreds of people are participating. We're walking everywhere. Walking and talking for the Republican Party.
Money.
But given the generally negative campaigns, at a time when millions of Americans have genuine fears about their economic well-being, the question may be, who wants to vote?
No clue.
We're at that stage where I think we all knew we were going to be 3 months ago, which is who can get their voters to the polls, and it has nothing to do with what we saw on television.
Electoral beauty, though, is in the eye of the beholder, often the partisan believers, and he who brings them out in the greatest numbers will be the happiest come next Tuesday night.
Bottom line is turnout. The bottom line is what we call the ground war. It's ground war politics.
Vote, vote, vote.
So, David Broder, you've been tracking this whole idea of turnout. In some ways, it seems like democracy at its best, trying to get people to the polls. But why is it especially critical in such a close election year?
It's particularly important this year, Gwen, because the general assumption is that the public will not turn out spontaneously in massive numbers. I had one labor leader, Jerry McEntee, say to me, we're kind of willing for there to be a low turnout because we think our folks will be there. And in a low turnout, an organized group, whether it's a union or the National Rifle Association or whatever the group may be, that can generate especially high turnout, can have extraordinary influence on the outcome.
Is there a party that has a particular advantage when it comes to get out the vote, traditionally get out the vote efforts?
Well, as the piece just said, historically Republicans have had the advantage because their constituents tend to be better educated, better off financially, and more civically involved. But in 1996, Labor spent a lot of money on television trying to influence the vote and failed. In 1998, they took that same money and said, we're going to try to do door-to-door and workplace contact, and they had extraordinary success. The Democrats picked it up from Labor, and both of them did it well in 2000. Now the Republicans are into the game seriously, probably for the first time.
It's a pretty big money game, isn't it?
It is, because it's labor intensive, but it's also done, I have to say, driving out here tonight, I noticed not much traffic in Washington, D.C., because the congressional offices have been emptied, all of the interest groups' offices have been emptied. Their staffs are out around the country working on voter turnout.
When there are all kinds of crazy tactics, too. Last weekend, one of the parties sent a bus to a church and took 50 of the churchgoers to vote early in one of the states, early voting, just as a way to get them to the polls early. They're trying all kinds of techniques to get people out. And the Republicans, as David said, they traditionally had the advantage. Democrats did much better 4 years ago, and Republicans are running scared, so they're trying to be much more aggressive this time.
Well, let's talk about why turnout matters. It matters because everything's up for grabs this year. The entire House, control of the Senate, and hundreds of races closer to home. Entering the final weekend, no one is making predictions anymore. There's too much up in the air. Call it the toss-up election. Competitive Senate races include Colorado, Republican incumbent Wayne Allard versus Democrat Tom Strickland. Minnesota, Republican Norm Coleman versus Democrat Walter Mondale. Missouri, Republican Jim Talent versus incumbent Democrat Gene Carnahan. North Carolina, Republican Elizabeth Dole versus Democrat Erskine Bowles. South Dakota, Republican John Thune versus Democrat Tim Johnson. And Texas, Republican John Cornyn versus Democrat Ron Kirk. At least 19 governor's races bear watching, including Florida, incumbent Republican Jeb Bush versus Democrat Bill McBride, and Maryland, Republican Bob Ehrlich versus Democrat Kathleen Kennedy Townsend. And in the House, candidates are still running neck and neck in Connecticut, Indiana, Maryland, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania. Okay, Rick, let's talk about the Senate race everybody's been talking about all week, which is this lightning round in Minnesota between now and Tuesday involving the former Vice President, Walter Mondale, and the Republican nominee, Norm Coleman.
Gwen, that's the stunner. A week ago, who would have thought Walter Mondale running for the Senate? It's an amazing turn of events out of tragedy. And what's particularly surprising is Walter Mondale has been an elder statesman of the party for so many years. I mean, no one would have ever imagined this. I remember interviewing Paul Wellstone right after he was elected to the Senate 12 years ago, and I said, who do you turn to for advice about how to be a senator? And he said, you know, I had breakfast in Minneapolis with Walter Mondale. He's an elder statesman of the party, and he told me, Paul, you know, you got 6 years, don't try to do everything in 6 days. So here Paul Wellstone 12 years ago was going to Mondale. Mondale is, it's been so long since he's been in the Senate that the life expectancy of the average American citizen is 4 years longer now than it was when he was in the U.S. Senate.
Which is a good thing when you're 74 years old.
But what's interesting about this race is right when this happened, it was a neck-and-neck race when Wellstone was still in it. Right when this happened, people at the White House...
Thank you for watching, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe.